capture 3 dimensions. It's more organic, you know. I'm Japanese and people say, oh, you are like, you know, Sony, you know, people hate Sony or JVC or hardware, you see. So I had to cover all the hardware, TV box, to make more art. Then I was a sculptor. I went to art school. You know, I wanted to be more video as art, not just video as a TV box, you know. So I hide all ugly part of the machinery of TV image, like living room, TV set there, and kids eating potato chips and watching TV, you know. I don't like those interfering. So I use more organic material like plywood or mirror, or, you know, I use even water too when I made a, you know, diva piece. Then I think of the material like 3 dimensions. It's a time too, because video is a time art. My work includes, you know, electronic signal like frequency, like, you know, currency of the image, but also broken mirror I use. It's cutting time and cutting my memory of 3-dimensional memory to make mirage of moving image with object.
Contemporary arts offer a variety of currents. As for the last few years, the so-called subjective expressionism has drawn attention. So has got a new generation of video artists, got rid of the causal conceptualism of the video artists of the 1970s. These new video artists, they work with video in a free and a spontaneous way. For them, video is the same value as painting, writing, sound, sculpting, or photography. I create my own images. I build my own decorations and paintings and sculptings. And I create things in the landscapes, outside, on location. And sometimes I pick up something from television, but that's not the main part.
The piece has to do a lot with Germany. That's one reason that I use the piano, because the music is a cliché about the Germans. And in the other part, so you can see in the pianos there are several levels. You can see other images. And for example, in one monitor, in the middle one, you have the whole culture background of Germany from the beginning to the end. And for me, the end point for the moment was the Second World War. because you have 3 monitors and there are 3 different parts of history for me. On the left side there's the history about my childhood. Then in the middle monitor you have the education, the school education, and school education for me stopped after the Second World War. So the last images you can see are the Nürnberger Prozesse. And then on the white monitor, that's my own history now.
I'm standing here on the roof of the Stedelijk Museum. Next to me is this wind installation. In here is a live camera which is relayed to the space downstairs, where there is a video compass. This image will push away the other pre-recorded tapes which are in the space downstairs.
Directions, different images have been put into the flow, also according to feeling. So they're just little flashes of images which come from journeys and which in fact probably have been recorded in the east, the west, and so on. And what is interesting, and I just repeat that I said that those images are put in spontaneously. What the wind is doing is in some way overriding these spontaneous things with its own natural kind of interruption. So we give it the place of being able to in some way dominate the whole thing that we've very carefully composed.
Originally, the idea came, the concept actually came when I was in Amsterdam at the Stedelijk Museum in 60-80 Attitude Concept Image Show, and had to get away from my own work and went next door to the Van Gogh Museum and got to see the Japanese prints that he had collected. And at that time found it amazing that there could be such a richness of form in what was a singular gestalt of imagery. And this was being done in 1850s or so, or earlier. And here we are over a century later, where we have all the formal devices of presentation and high technology of video, but in fact used without the full significance or meaning that seemed to be there in the Japanese prints. And it was at that point in time that I decided to change the conventions of my work, the formal device of the work, from television imagery to 19th century Japanese painting as form, and to try to see what high technology, with all the ability it has to change formal device, could do, starting the inspiration from the Japanese print, and the Japanese print being a form highly accessible to the public, and also showing scenes from daily life.
He was cowering under the bed because I looked at him, and he was cowering in a corner of it. He usually slept down toward the foot, but this time he was up toward the front.
Yeah, this particular piece has to do with the domination of the imagination by popular culture, and how just as our individual liberties are always being encroached on by the government and media, also the territory of the mind is being controlled through popular culture, and specifically science fiction, which has always been given a place as the ultimate form of imagination, yet with Star Wars and other movies and books that are out now, it just becomes cowboys in outer space, and exploring how even that our dreams are controlled.
I saw a shape kind of moving around the bushes, and I thought, oh God, looks like a deer. I'll just freeze here and watch it. And so I just froze where I was, and then something crossed into the light. And it was kind of like a path there that I was on. And I could remember seeing really blue.
Now who's sick here? Who's feeling ill? The plant or the adolescent girl?
I like to cater to different audiences, to relate to children on one level, then adults on another level, teenagers on another level. So, and that's kind of the way I think.
A black cab. Rudis go. He has to go inside. Well, you know what? This one is best. He wants to go inside. Well, look.
The theory is Paul MacLean's theory. It's called the triune brain model, and it says that the human brain is composed of 3 layers of different structures, so to speak. And each one of them is like an outgrowth of the former, evolutionarily speaking. So the oldest one is what he calls the reptilian complex. It's buried deep within the mass of the brain. It resembles, in terms of physical structure and chemical structure, the brain of a reptile, and also controls patterns of behavior which are reptilian in nature, such as territoriality, aggression, homing, mating, the ability of identifying a member of your own species that is either stronger, like a leader, or weaker, somebody that you can, inflict upon.
The object of society is people's willingness to believe that truth is universal and unaffected by time. Mediocre political and religious morals hide their lack of intellectual stature by appealing to that belief. In war time, kings, presidents, popes, the object of society is people's willingness to believe that truth is universal.
Certain kinds of ritual related to the defense of territory and so on and so forth. But what made me emphasize in this particular part of the human brain is the fact that being the oldest part is the one which is controlling most of what we are doing as a modern society in terms of militarism, bureaucracy, political implementation of power, and so on and so forth.
Appealing to that belief.
So that's basically what this installation is about.
Basically, the setup is all just equipment, as we're just working with signal and nothing else. So it's just video signal that we're working with. That's the installation. So we have no other artifacts or anything like that. Tapes are 2 hours of uncut in-camera edit, continuous, without any change right out of the camera, and go through variations in suspension between naturalism and abstraction along a poetic and musical line. The point of the installation is to recreate the space that the tapes were made in. That is a real space where every movement and perception changes the sense of the space that you're within.
Most of my video work are talking about violence, illusion, death. Illusions, you know. The muleta is an illusion, and in the flamenco dance, the robes are also an illusion. It's the same. The matador and the flamenco dancers are just the same, you know. They give only illusions. A little bit few frames difference on each monitor. Go like this, like in the sea, you know. It's go up and down and up and down and up and down.
The name of this piece is called The Workstation, and it's a piece about corporate mentality and corporate experience, working for a corporation, you know. And in America, anyway, that is a very distinct experience when you work for one of the very rigorous and rigid corporations. And I was trying to play with some of the ideas of the worker in the midst of the corporate mentality. So the installation is going to be sort of like an office workstation, but it's also kind of an altar to the corporation. And so you walk up as if you were a worker and look at this altar console where a worker would sit, and you see a work tape, and you see a training type tape, and you also see some speakers, or hear some speakers talking to you, and these speakers are very ridiculous in a way. They say all the cliches that the corporation, the executives tells the worker to keep them satisfied.
Start work. Oh, start work. Let's talk about start work. Start work. Start work. Start work. Start computerized, automated, to get out there and beat the competition. You may not have time. And if you don't have a company, you won't have a job.
It's playing on a fantasy island where on the island is the Golden Temple, and where some people most of the roles are played by me with two guys who are the other players, and it's all made of associative texts and images. It's about temptation and death, and my idea behind it is that I'm making kind of irony with the television images, that I use very recognizing images, but then make them myself.
In 1966-67, I worked at Goldwater Memorial Hospital, and my first day when I was working there, they took me into a ward in which there were about 50 patients in iron lungs, and what one saw was a box on 4 legs And sticking out of this box was a head of a person who was in an artificial respirator and a plug attached to the box. And one of my first impressions was this was a person of the future, that this was a spaceman, and that no one could enter that space. That was his own space and was the limit of the space. In 1965 and 66, I started collaborating with an American artist, Ralph Hilton, and making various tapes that related to this idea of a spaceman. And at that time, we decided to present this work in New York. And from the beginning, we thought of it as an ongoing project. The ongoing project being a series of walls that could be somewhat like a library, in which we would catalog various images that would relate to this idea of a spaceman. We divided the wall into 3 sections, and those 3 sections were thought about in the 3 traditional ways of looking at painting, which are portraits, still lifes, and landscapes. And one could imagine that this is 3 ways of measuring a space. For example, if I should see an image this close, we could consider that a portrait. But if I would see the image a bit further away, one could say that that's a still life. And if I would go even further away, say 3 blocks away, one would look at it as a landscape. And so this wall, which is centered in this room, is divided into those 3 categories.
Also, I would have to say something about the journey from the birthplace of one artist to the final workplace of another artist, in that Monet created Giverny in order to create his work. And I'm particularly interested in the artist who builds his own location and then works there in a fairly insular fashion and seemingly unaffected by the outside world. The piece is not really a comment on his isolation, but it is a comment on the visual quality of creating that kind of eternal motif that you live in and you work in at the same time. For me, my journey from Ohio, which is not my Giverny at all, is a journey, and nor is Giverny my workplace either. They are both representative, though, of locations along the trip toward what finally does become your place to live and work and die.
piece basically consists of a large head, or the top of a large head, a head of about 8 feet high, top of a head with ears on the side. This head then becomes a place for people to fit into, for people to sit in. So almost as if places in, say, a brain for people to squeeze into, fit into. So the seating places then present various kinds of possibilities of people, possibilities of relationships between people, person facing person, one person facing away from another person. The ear positions two people sort of not in the person-to-person relationships, but waiting outside, waiting as if they might get a chance later to engage in a kind of person-to-person relation. But they're person-to-person relationships, but rather than a person seeing a person only sees the other person by means of video, by means of television. So it sets up the possibility of a kind of physical interaction, but that physical interaction then is replaced by a kind of electronic interaction.
Ich wollte von dem Architekten, was ich aus Philipp Sanger herausbekommen, aber er hielt sich, versuchte nur mir eine Apartment anzubieten. Ich habe ja überall entlang der Küste von Millionen Häuser baut. Es ist selbstverständlich, dass er in einem davon wohnt. Weil die griechische Polizei einen Patrick Chase überprüft hat. Lange bevor der Bericht kam. Deshalb wurde Lucier Bernardi nie mit Philipp Sanger verwendet. Nur mit Patrick Chase. Gerne mit ihm über Patrick Chase unterhalten. Patrick Chase. Sagen Sie ihm, ich werde kommen.
Aber mich hat auch interessiert daran, sagen wir mal, dass die Bilder eine ganz eigenwillige Ausdruckskraft hatten, die auf der einen Seite an Science-Fiction-Visionen erinnern und auf der anderen Seite an das Kino von ganz früher, also das heißt an das Kino von Lumier und ich glaube eben, dass das Fernsehen, ja, so, das jeden Tag sendet, in der ganzen Welt, überall existiert, dass das Fernsehen den Menschen viel mehr kontrolliert und das Fernsehen bildet den Geschmack und es ist sozusagen eine innere Kontrolle, die das Fernsehen ausübt, die viel stärker ist als das, was die Außenkontrolle ist. Die Außenkontrolle ist so eine Art alte Überwachung, das ist die Orwellsche Überwachung, ja.
Nee. Oder ist es sogar so, dass es mir jetzt noch schlechter geht?
The idea is to pursue one notion, which is the notion of using the television as a source of light rather than as a source of images. So in each piece here, the television is a projector and the videotape is a means of organizing the colors in that projection. And each of these shapes that you see sitting around here unfinished is a crystal, I call them, a device for containing the color that the monitors generate. I'm actually trying to make one, I'm trying to make it seem like this isn't a number of separate pieces, but this is one environment that you enter, and that all the pieces are just like crystals, things that grow from one place and are specific to that place. And the sound is hopefully a means of tying those things together. It's an 8-channel sound system. So.
What I'm interested in is in the possibilities to manipulate with the space and time. And I took football and also Johan Cruyff because football is a thing that everybody understands. The whole people understands football. And Johan Cruyff is really a big vedette that everybody knows. I try to make art like in the Renaissance, that the artists took a very popular subject, the Madonnas, the scenes, yeah, but they use the really, or they try to resolve the really painting problems like space and the color and the light.
So I don't have a small dark room when I do some intimate stuff. Huh? Then that time was a show of Stanley Brown there. So I will make a like Stanley Brown, one straight line this way and this line this way. Our satellite TV, this Good Morning Mr. Oil, will reach by November 30, it will reach about 23 million people in the world. And then I found it is not that interesting to reach 23 million people in one country. Then you'll see, kind of average. It's also interesting, but 23 million people in 6-7 countries are different. There are certain people, watching. So it's not number, but also quality is, important.
Wanted to create a space that threw you off your normal references, so that when you entered, the first thing perhaps the viewer is aware of is these gigantic shadows their movement is casting on the walls. In contrast, as you come further into the room, you pass in front of the camera that is on the floor, and the camera is watching your movements of only your feet. Only the movements of your feet moving through light. And I wanted very much to change the whole reality of this room by the camera in relation, watching your feet in relation to these large shadows. And as I was working, I suddenly saw a shadow on one of the boxes and turned around expecting to see Doreen Mignot, and looked up and there was nobody there. And at that moment, I said, well, yes, the piece is beginning to work. I also would like very much if the public would stand perhaps quietly to the side and just feel the ambience of the space without the movement. So there is this duality that I'm interested in, the contrast of the gigantic shadows and then something, the camera, watching your movement through light on the floor.
Yes, that is all the installation is about burning of images, losing images all the time. There are fade to blacks all the time, very, very long fade to blacks, and I almost don't use all the screens. It's very punctual, except for a punctuation, which is precisely something we don't know until the end. Someone doing something, and it's burning a letter, and then there is a sequence, the last sequence, where this woman is burning letters. But what happens is, I hope, but it's not burning the object, but she is, because of the process of the image, she's completely burning herself.
Our installation is in many ways very similar to our performance work. That's why it looks so simple. In our early work, since last 3 years, we are doing this Nazi Crossing series where we use 2 chairs and 1 table. And in this installation, we even avoid the table. So we have just these 2 chairs and with 1 monitor. These 2 chairs present 2 characters. One is female and receptive, and is big chair with arms and with monitor. Another one is very straight, simple chair with this speaker in it. And all this installation is actually dialogue between male and female. On the monitor, what we show is the tape made in Sicily called Terra dea Madre. And it's based on the cult of the Dea Madre, of the Mother God, with a little figure found in the ruins of the Selinunte Greek temple. And now the tape we show is based on the natives we really filmed, the women's and the men's. All outdoor shots are with the males, and all indoor shots are with the females. And so as you see the installation, when appear the male part, then the speaker is talking with this chair, and when appear the female, then is coming from the monitor.
Colofiti del nobis, puris alafitu ponti. Intercontagon, Hompalanteris affentro tondarala vicas. And colofiti.
The title of the piece that I did the installation is called Room for St. John of the Cross. And in a way it's a homage to the work of St. John of the Cross, particularly one situation in his life where he was kept prisoner for 9 months in a cell pretty similar to the size of this room that I've created here in the piece. And during that period he wrote most of the poems for which he's known. And they're very, very strong and very, very powerful poems that actually speak really more about love and ecstasy than about anger and fear. And so I designed the piece with that sort of feeling in mind, in a way, transcendent sort of feeling. And what I did was I created a room within a room. That's the basic structure of the piece. This room sits in the large room that you're in. So in a way, in the work, when people come into it, there's no outside to the piece. Once you enter this large space, you are in the piece, and you're sort of enveloped by it. And there are 2 channels of video in it. One of them is a large video projection screen of mountains that I shot out in California with the cameras jerking and moving around, and they're projected in a large image. And inside this room, while that's going on, and the sound of wind is filling the space from 2 speakers outside, inside this small room, there's a small window that you can look in. And there's a monitor on a table, 4-inch monitor of a shot of a still mountain. The camera never moves. And also there's the sound of a voice that you can barely hear coming from within this room. It's someone reading the poems of St. John in Spanish, but it's really very hard to understand. You can't make out the words. So the piece sort of in a way is like it's like the center of the storm, in a way, the center of the cyclone. That there's an incredibly turbulent sort of chaos all around, and there's this, in a way, calm and very, very solid center that sort of anchors the whole piece.
sin Dios vivir no puedo, pues sin Él y sin mí quedo. Este vivir que será. El pez que del agua sale, aun de alivio no carece, que en la muerte que padece al fin de la muerte.